today's video, I'm gonna walk you through how to color grade and make your videos look stunning. So let's dive straight into my screen. Most of you guys are probably not gonna film in log, in S-Log, for example. This is filmed in S-Log 3, but the same things applies if you basically have filmed your content in Rec 709, which is the standard format. For example, if you're filming on your iPhone, if you're filming on a camera, that's essentially Rec 709. So the first thing you want to do is basically go over to the color tab. So down here we have the color tab, and it's gonna look something like this. On the right here you have your nodes. You can select them here, and these are basically layers that you can then add color grading things to. So we're going to talk a bit more about that in a second. Then we have on the left here clips. Here are all of your clips. And then here are the LUTs. We're going to also import them for you. Down here you have some waveforms and vector scopes. These we are going to actually use. And then here you have all of your color grading effects. So the first thing I usually do is I add a few more serial nodes. So the way we do this is we hover over here and make sure it's selected so it's orange. Then we click Option and S, and that's how you add new serial nodes. You can also right click on this, add a node and serial node. And I usually start with 4 nodes. Now, if you have a Rec 709 clip, you don't have to do this step. But as you can see, my clip is raw, it's filmed in S-Log, so it's very flat, and we need to change this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over to Effects, find the Color Space Transform effect right here, and drag it to the 3rd node right there. We can actually right click on this and then rename it so we know what node it is. So we're gonna go label node and then CST, so color space transform. And here we are gonna select the input color space that you recorded your video in. So I filmed this in S-Log 3 and S-Gamut Cine. S-Gamut 3 Cine. And then here in input gamma, we're gonna choose then S-Log 3 like that. And you already see it looks way more normal. If you press Command D, you can actually deselect individual nodes like this and see the before and after. Then we want to put on output color space Rec 709, and then output gamma we want to put at Rec 709A. And if you remember in the last video, if you open up the settings, you can make sure that your timeline color space is also set to Rec 709A and output color space to Rec 709A. And this is just gonna ensure once you export your video, it's gonna actually look the same as it looks in the timeline once you export it. So it's not gonna shift colors once you export the video. And that's essentially it. Now the video is in Rec 709 and it looks very normal. So this is probably where most people start, with a Rec 709 image. And why do you then want to shoot in S-Log, for example? Because you get much more dynamic range. You can change the colors much more drastically, and you have much more color grading like room, and you can tweak the colors more. Now we move on to the 2nd node. Here is where we essentially, I would call this contrast. Here is where we change the contrast and the exposure and so on. So what I then would do is I would actually go here to the scope and waveform, and here we can see the waveform. Then I go over to the curves section and press these 3 buttons, and Here you can select editable splines, and this is just gonna make it way easier. If you click on one of these dots, you get another dot here, and you can actually change the curves like this. So I'm gonna make a subtle S curve. So drag a bit down here. You can see the waveform. We want to keep it. It shouldn't go under this here. It should actually stay inside this area right here. So if everything is down here, you see it's way too dark. It needs to be evenly spread out. So we're gonna slightly drag it down and then move these highlights up a bit like that. Something like this. And another great tip here in contrast and exposure is if you go to HDR and exposure, you can actually change the brightness here. And the reason why I like to change it over here in global is because if you go to the traditional here offset, it's not going to be as smooth. So I like to actually go in here and change the exposure. It's much more smooth, and it changes basically the exposure on the entire image. So that's what I like to do. Then the first node is the white balance. Here is where we adjust the white balance, the color temperature of the image. And as you can see now down here, it's pretty evenly spread out, the exposure, so it's properly exposed right there. And let's name then the first node to white balance. And now we go over to the vector scope. And here's a few settings I want you to change. So if you press this button here, you can actually go in here and then colorize. So we want to see the colors. Then we can show 2x zoom. This is going to make everything bigger, so easier to see. And this is very important. Show skin tone indicator. This is the white line right here. And you want to have your basically skin tone colors on this line perfectly. Then what we want to do is press these 3 dots and then display qualifier focus. So when you go up here and press this button here, you have the qualifier, and if you select the qualifier and hover over your skin tones, you can see a small yellow down here, a small yellow circle, and it's perfectly, almost perfectly on this white line, which is the skin color and skin tone. So it's almost perfect white balance. And I always say this, when you're filming, you need to nail your white balance when you're filming. You can change it in post, but it's best if you actually can nail it when you are actually recording your videos. So if we want to change the white balance, then I usually go to this right here, and instead of changing the temperature and tint, we are actually gonna change the offset, the gain and gamma and so on. But I usually stick to just the offset, and here you can change the color. So if we slightly check again my skin tones, so we can move it slightly upwards to like pink and red. We can slightly move it like that maybe. Now it's almost perfect. So you see like very subtle movements. And now I usually add the LUT on the image. So what I want to do is I want to keep my skin tones, because now if I add a LUT here, you see like my skin is like, it's not going to look very nice when I hover over these LUTs. So what I usually do is I right click on this fourth node and then add node and add layer node. And now on the top node, we can actually select the LUT that you want. So it's not going to display right now here, because we are actually going to filter out or mask out the skin colors. So the LUT doesn't affect the skin colors, and we're going to color grade the skin separately. So let's add this LUT on right there, and now we can name this node actually LUT, and then the lower node we can name skin mask. So we know that's the skin tone mask. And now if we go over to this pen right here, you select this tool right here all the way to the left, and then you press your skin like that, and the effect is, or the LUT is now selected, but it doesn't look very nice. So what we want to do is we want to go up here, and to highlight we want to press that. Now we can see actually what it's affecting. What we now can do is we can actually go and change the hue, play around with the hue, the saturation, and you see how it's gonna affect the image. And we wanna only select the skin colors. It's a bit tricky because I have some yellow and orange also in the background, but we're gonna try to work around that. And what we also can do is we can select this plus pen and then plus. So you see it's gonna try to add these colors in. And now you see it's selected a bunch of different other things that I don't want. So now it's actually time to play around with the hue, the saturation, and so on. So we're gonna reduce this, not too much, something like this maybe. And what we then can do is go to here on the side, and we can even change more of the like settings over here to make it even better. And you really just have to play around with these settings to get it like almost perfect. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but yeah, this is what I do. I usually use the pre-filler, clean black, and then black clip. Then I also white clip. I adjust these, and then clean white. And then I usually add some blur radius, and this is gonna make the transition from the LUT to my skin tone smoother. Now if we deselect this, you can actually see that my face is not affected by this LUT. It looks a bit weird, so we are actually gonna go over to this, make sure that the skin is selected, and then we are gonna press log. So this is filmed in log, so this is gonna be the best to actually adjust my skin tones here. Whoops, like there. So now we're gonna just play around like with the offset, the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows, and I wanna add some more orange. And remember again, like you can just hover over your face and you see, make sure that your skin tones are where they need to be. Something like this. I don't want to be too orange. I'm gonna add a bit more like green into the image there. This is actually perfect. If you look down here, you can see I'm right in the middle of the line. And I want to make my face slightly smoother, not too smooth, but make it just a bit more clean. So what I do is I go to here and then mid details, and I reduce this. If you see, it's gonna make my skin a lot smoother. I usually reduce this to like -15 or something, not too much, like that. We don't want to look like a doll. So something like that. And now what you can do is actually, if you press Option and D, it's going to deselect all of the LUTs, and you can see the before and after. You can also go over here to the color wheel and deselect everything and see the before and after. So it's already looking pretty cool and nice. But there's a few steps I always do. So I press this and then again Option S to add a serial node. And now we're actually going to play around with the colors a bit more. So go over to the primary wheel here, log, and now we can actually play around with the shadow, midtone, and highlights of the entire image. So I usually like to add a bit more blue to my image. You can see how it affects the image. You don't want to add too much, just slightly. And then we move over to midtones. We can add a bit more, a bit more orange maybe. And then the highlights, usually like to add a bit more orange like that. And now if we deselect it, you see it's a very subtle change, but it makes a huge difference in the end. Like if you look here, like on my shirt, it's a bit more blue. My face, everything looks a bit more smoother. Here is, if you see it right now, there's a bit magenta, and that's blue now. And to make this even better, we then add another serial node, and now we can actually go to the curves again, and here you can change all of the colors. So the hue, the saturation, and then the luminance, so the highlights of your image of a specific color. So what you do is you add a keyframe on all of these. So you just press the colors down here, and now you can actually go and change the hue on a specific color. So remember, we don't want to change like the reds or the yellows too much, because that's going to affect the skin tones, and they should be at this point already perfect. But we can go and play around with the green. If you have any green in your image, it's not going to affect anything in my image because I don't have any green. But for example, like the blues, it's going to change a lot. So I'm going to add a bit more green into my blues. Change this a bit also, a bit more greens. The pinks is not going to change anything. Now moving on to saturation. So we can actually, if it's too yellow, we can reduce the saturation a bit. I'm actually going to reduce it slightly because I feel like it's a bit too yellow. And now it's much more clean in my opinion. And then the blues, again, we might want to add a bit of saturation and then reduce it here so it creates a pretty clean image. Then we go over to the highlights. I want to add a bit more highlights to the yellows, like that, and then a bit there, and then reduce the blues a bit so I pop a bit more. And that's pretty much it for the colors. Now there's a few different things that you can do to make your image more cinematic. You can add grain, you can add glow and halation. Usually when I'm editing or color grading a talking head video, I don't want to add too much grain. I want to keep it pretty clean. But for example, if you have B-roll and you want to make a cinematic look, you can add some grain and halation to that image. But what I usually like to do is actually add some glow to my image. So I'm going to add another serial node here, go to the effects and search up glow. Add that on and you can see how it glows up the image. Now there's a few things I need to change. So if you go to composite type and actually select soft light, now you can change the gain and the gamma like that. I usually take the saturation down because I don't want to make it too red. I drag it almost down, and now we can play around with these until we are happy. Then I like to edit the spread. We're gonna add a bit more spread, and then here the shiny threshold to actually change this around how much we want the effect to be here. And if the effect is too heavy, you can actually change the opacity of the effect and drag it a bit down. And now if you think like the image is too dark, you can go back to the contrast and the exposure, go here and then to HDR, and then you can change the exposure accordingly. Make sure the waveform is not clipping anywhere, and like this, and then go back to the glow. And it's all about like fine-tuning these small details here to find a balance like this. Now it looks pretty clean. And yeah, as I said, if you want to add grain, you can go up here to add a serial node, and then grain, add some film grain, change it to whatever. I really like the 60 millimeter here, and yeah, it's gonna add some grain to the image. So yeah, that's pretty cool, but I'm gonna delete that for now. So that's essentially it. That's how I color grade my talking head videos and my clips, and you can see it's a pretty clean image, not too much. I'm actually gonna take down this glow effect a bit more to make it a bit more clean. And once you have done this for one of your clips, the beauty is you can copy this effect to all of your other clips. But keep in mind, your setup needs to be the same. So if the light or the white balance changes, you need to do some few adjustments. But for like my talking heads in the studio, it's very simple because the same lighting, I have my curtains down, so it's gonna be the same light consistently. Now that you have the color grade ready to go, you wanna select the first node and then just Ctrl C or Command C to copy it. Go over, make sure that your clips are selected, and now you can see all of your clips. I don't want to add these on the adjustment clips because these are the zoom effects. So I only want to add it on the raw clips right here. So what I can do is I can just make sure this is selected and Ctrl V or Command C, make sure that I copied all of them, and like that it's gonna copy it over. And I can also like select these, I hold in Shift and select all of the clips that I want, and then I don't want this right here, so I'm gonna hold Command in and deselect that. And now I can just paste that color grade on all of my clips. And now you have just color graded your videos. So if you go back to edit, you can actually see that your video is color graded and it looks amazing. If you click up here, you can actually deselect the effects and see like that. And it looks pretty amazing, right? That's essentially it. Everything you need to know about color grading, Rec 709 clips and S-Log clips, or log clips if you're filming on Canon or whatever camera you're shooting on. So with that being said, let's get back to work.